Hello, readers of chapter 44 of Ecce Romani. Well, call it the Latin nerd in me, but ablative absolutes are my favorite thing. My favorite thing. One thing as a person who prides himself on efficiency, ablative absolutes are a great, efficient use of language. Look at what it takes us in English to say in, let's say, the cook having been summoned, or when the cook had been summoned, they all praised the dinner. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words. But the Romans, champions of efficiency and pragmatism at all times, do it in 2. Quoquo vocato. The cook having been summoned, they all praised the dinner. Also, let's just go through this whole sentence here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So something very tight about the Latin language. If you look at a paragraph of Latin text and then you look at the translation of that Latin text into English, you will typically notice that the English translation requires twice as much space as the Latin text itself. So it's a marvelous sort of compact usage of language that the Latin nerd in me, and hopefully you, just can't help but stand back in awe of. So ablative absolutes, what are they? Typically you will see there are 2 words, as I say, set off by a comma, absolutely separated from the rest of the sentence grammatically, often its own little world, tied to the rest of the sentence, obviously, in meaning, or required in order to make sense, perhaps, of the rest of the sentence. But it's still a kind of a dependent clause. You can have omnes caenam lauda verunt without the quoquo vocato, but you can't have the quoquo vocato without the omnes caenam lauda verunt. And that is what makes it a dependent clause. This one is independent. It can exist by itself. This one is dependent. And as you'll see, Latin uses many different constructions for dependent clauses, and this is one of the tightest, cleanest ones that it has. So let's see how it works. Ablative absolutes. Absolute because, as I say, set off by from the rest of the sentence. Vocato and quoquo have nothing to do with describing this subject. For example, this thing is off in its own world. So it's absolute. The word absolute means separated from is one way to think of that, like basically dissolved or loosened away from the rest of the sentence. When a priest gives you absolution for your sin, he is loosening you from that sinful nature that you had and now you do not have. So it's separated and it's also ablative. If you look at these endings here, quoquo, vocato, these are both ablative endings. That'll work down here as you see fure and suripiente. These are also ablatives of different declension. So as I say, typically 2 words, but as we see here, since an ablative absolute can consist of something like a participle, which it does here, that participle is part verb, and it can therefore take like a direct object. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. So quoquo vocato, what is this comprised of? It's comprised of the cook, and it's comprised of that perfect passive participle, which is the 4th principal part of voco vocare. In its native form, this would look like vocatus. If you have the principal parts of voco vocare, it's voco, vocare, vocavi, vocatus. And that vocatus, as an us a adjective, which is what a participle is, can change its case to ablative. And that's what it looks like, especially when it's modifying a masculine noun like coquus. So the noun and the participle, which describes it, are both put into the ablative case. And from this we have cook, and this is having been summoned. And that can be translated. The cook having been summoned, all praise the dinner. Or it can be translated more loosely. When the cook had been summoned, they all praise the dinner. The important thing here is that since this is the perfect passive participle, the action of this takes place prior to this main verb here. We'll see that's a little bit different down when we get down here. This is a present participle, so this action will take place at the same time as this main verb. But perfect passive participles always occur prior to the main verb's action. So, in order for everyone to praise the dinner, first the cook had to be summoned into the room, right? We can't have the praising before we have the cook arriving or having been summoned. So, it can be, ablative absolutes can often will take this form. Noun, participle. Noun, participle. That's what this is down here. Noun, participle. As I said before, this participle also happens to take a direct object. This is while the thief is stealing the clothes, Sextus enters the apoditerium, which is the changing room. So here, surripiente and ingreditor are both taking place at the same time because it's a different kind of a participle. It's called a present active participle, and the action of those takes place at the same time as the main verb. But everything is ablative, and two words primarily. Incidentally, it happened. This participle takes a direct object, as I say. But let's see if we got another one here. Well, let's just jump ahead to 44D and see how they work in action. So let's identify the ablative absolute first of all, and then it says describe the temporal relationship between the participle and the ablative absolute and the action of the verb. So let me back up a tiny bit. These ablative absolutes can be noun participle, but also sometimes ablative absolutes can be two nouns, and then we sort of introduce a form of the verb esse to be, and so we can say Caesare Duce, and really that looks just like Caesar the leader. But that doesn't take the nuance of the ablative, or ablative absolute particularly, into account. So with these, we sort of introduce words of our own in English. Caesar being leader, or when Caesar is leader or was leader, depending on the tense of the main verb that comes after that. So that's another usage. It could be noun, when Caesar was leader. With me as a guard, me custode. And also we can do noun adjective here. Since Sextus is sick. Now, I say since, but again, there's a lot of looseness to how that, what that word will be, that conjunction, or that can be a variety of things. Since Sextus is sick, while Sextus was sick, because Sextus is sick. It depends on the circumstances. You sort of supply the best English word to go with it. For the Romans, it's strictly sexto aegro. But for us, we have to consider, how do I translate that? Is it since Sextus is sick? We have to think about the rest of the verb, the rest of the main verb in the sentence that comes after. Is it was or is it is? And, again, with a couple of examples, you'll see how these generally work. So look at 44D. So find the ablative absolute. Easiest way is, as I say, cut off by commas typically. As you get into more advanced Latin, that will not be the case. But they are here to get you used to them. And describe the relationship between the timing of the ablative absolute and the main verb. And then just translate into English. So here, pueris and clamantibus, we recognize as ablatives. Is and ibus. Puer from second declension. Clamantibus, this present participle from the third declension. All present participles, again, are third declension, thus the ibus. But ibus matches with is, both ablatives. And there happens to be a prepositional phrase thrown into the middle of this. But in general, what we have here is something about the boys, and there's some shouting going on, and it's happening in the school. So before we can decide whether we know it's the boys shouting in the school, but we're going to need some kind of a conjunction or some kind of word to sort of help it connect to the rest of the sentence here. So let's see. We got boys in the school shouting, and then the teacher, eratos, fit means is becoming angry. Fit is a present tense verb. So he is becoming angry. Since he is becoming angry, this clemantibus is going to be at the same time as this main verb fit. So we're going to say something like, while the boys, no. We have a causality going on here, right? We have a teacher getting angry, and there's something about boys shouting. So something tells me, as a parent of 3 children, I know this. There's shouting boys, and then this guy's becoming angry. So since there is a clear causality, we're going to say since the boys are shouting, why are and not were? Because that's present tense. Since the boys are shouting in the school, the teacher is becoming angry. And that is it. Since the boys are shouting in the school, the teacher becomes angry. So present participle, same time here and here. And that's your translation. Let's see. We'll cut down. Let's see if we can get something more interesting. This one I'll just say is similar to the example I sort of talked about above that was given. That's a noun and a noun. But let's stick with the participles and the nouns because those are more common. All right, let's try this one. 5. This takes place at the baths. A cellus is the slave who watches the clothes while the family goes into the baths and they're doing their thing. So this is a similar sort of pattern to the first one, except now we have traditis, which comes from trado, tradere, tradidi, I want to say, traditus. We get the word tradition from this. Tradition are things that are handed down by our ancestors to us. So this is something about handing over or handing down. And it works with vestimentis, which means clothing. So we have something clothing, and we have handed down, having been handed down, or handed over, really, I guess is better here. And then a cello here is going to be a dative here, to a cellus. And then something happened, like somebody went into the palaestrum or out into the palaestrum, which is the exercise room, I believe. So this is a perfect passive participle. So this action is going to take place prior to this action taking place. Remember the example of the cook who is summoned and then praised. So now we have clothes that are handed over and then they went out or they entered into the palaestra. So this is going to be roughly translated after the clothes. Since we've got this first, then this, we're going to say after the clothes had been handed over to a cellus, they entered. They meaning the boys or Uncle Titus or whoever it was that was going out into the palaestra. They went into, they entered onto or into the exercise grounds. And, could it be something besides after? Yes, but it would have to be something like since the clothes had been handed over to a cellus, they entered onto the palaestra. I just feel like after sounds better here. There's no clear causation or causality going on between this and this. It's not like they handed this stuff over and because that happened, then they necessarily went out here. So I would just say it's sort of kind of circumstantial. They handed it over, when they had handed it over, after they had handed it over, then they went out. So there are 2 examples of ablative absolutes in action. And I'll leave it alone at that and hope for you to figure out the rest. Good luck.